Think that's it. Hello, everyone. I'm Becky Goldsmith with Piece of Cake, and I'd like to thank you for joining me as I'm live taking a time out with you. The quilt, I'm pointing the wrong way. The quilt behind me is the one from the hand sewing book, and I put it up again because I like it. It's new. And the other thing I wanted to say while I'm thinking about it is this scarf. The scarf, and I should go to the next thing here. The scarf is like the quilt from the Baskets Inn. And I have it on because I'm cold, but also because it's cute and it's on sale. And I think Lorna will add a link. When they're gone, they're gone. They're big square silk scarves. They're nice, pretty, as you can see. Let me think. What's the other thing about that? Oh, you might notice in the other direction over here, there's more of the birds in Toyland. You know, the secret block I showed you not that long ago. There will be an announcement next week about an upcoming class. Just saying, get ready. Okay, but I thought I'd put that up because, you know, it's very cute. Plus, it's on my design wall behind this quilt as we tape right now. Okay, so it is April 14th. And when I was growing up, we had a tradition. I don't know where my mom came up with this. On May Day, on May 1st, the tradition we did as kids was that we would make little paper baskets and we would put cut flowers in them and we would take them to neighbors' houses and my grandmother's house. And, you know, I'm now the little old lady that would get the flowers on the door. But we would go and we would put the little basket with the flowers on the door and ring the doorbell and like back way up or run away. And it was a May Day surprise. And I've always thought about May Day as being a day to give a nice present to someone. And really, these days with the pandemic, we're getting back together with people. Any day is a good day to give someone a hello, I like you present. So I was thinking about that. And then I was also thinking about these little folding needle caddies. And I had never made one. I'd just seen them and I thought they can't be that hard to make. And they aren't that hard to make. And they make wonderful presents. So today I'm going to walk you through how to do it. And I'm going to get started right now showing you the pattern. I drew the flower-shaped pattern first. And I made one. And I realized that sewing scallops, oh yeah, they're very cute. But they're harder to sew. It takes longer. So I've also provided a pattern that is pointy. I'm calling it a star needle caddy. It really only looks like a star when it's open. Print either or both of these patterns onto cardstock. You can print these on paper and cover the top of them with a peel and stick laminate, but the English paper piecing specialty paper cardstock is what I used, and it works really well for these templates. If I was going to make a lot of these, I would cover the cardstock again with peel and stick laminate, but to just make a few, the cardstock is plenty. You'll need to print either or both of the patterns twice because you need a big template and a small template for each of these. And you'll see way at the end of the half hour that you actually might want to print them 3 times, and I'll explain that later. Now, before I forget, the pointy one, oh yeah, it is way faster to sew because you don't have to slow down around the curves. You'll see that. It makes up cute. And I thought when I first looked at it, and then Lorna said the same thing, it looks like a little fox, a little fox head. So if you wanted to, you could design your star needle caddy with a little, little eyes and a nose, make it into a fox. Just saying, in case I forget. So next video, I want to walk you through the tracing and the pinning and that stuff. Choose two fabrics, one for the front, one for the liner. And I'm going to use the floral for the front and the polka dot for the liner. Press them. And I pressed the front fabric first, then I placed the lining fabric over it, and I pressed them together. And often, especially if you've pre-washed your fabric, that will tend to hold everything in place. I've put both together on top of my sandboard, and I'm going to trace around the larger template. The line that I'm drawing is the seam line right there. You only have to draw this on one of the fabrics. Choose the one that the line shows up best on. I'm using my Blackwing 602 graphite pencil that I often use on fabric. It will make a line I can see, but I don't want to go over the top. But even without pressing down hard, it made a nice line. If you don't have a sandboard, you can place your fabric on top of a rotary mat and trace around the templates. And if you do that, then you probably don't have to do what I'm doing here, which is trimming away a lot of that excess fabric with my scissors. If I was on my rotary mat, I would use my rotary cutter to do this, but I'm not. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I've left plenty of space. If I was making a scalloped flower, I would have done exactly the same thing, tracing around the scallop. Next, I'm going to pin the points just to keep everything in place so that they don't shift. Before I sew these together, I want to think about how I'm going to close them. On the first needle case I made, I was being spectacularly lazy. So I chose a ribbon, and I'm going to sew a button right here and just wrap the ribbon once or twice around it and leave a tail of ribbon for undoing it. That is the lazy, easy way to do this. There is another way. This is a hair elastic. And I can insert the elastic here to whatever depth I think will be right, so that when I turn this right side out, I can bring this around and loop that over a button that is sewn to the front. So you wouldn't want to make it too short. You could make it a little bit long. I'm going to just totally guess here, and I want to put it at the inner point because that's where you want that closure to be. And then I'm going to pin on either side to keep that in place and to keep that in place. I would maybe put a pin between the bottom of that loop through both layers to hold the loop in position too. If you do decide to use ribbon for a tie, just be sure that it's wide enough that it gets sewn in when you sew. On this piece, I used a sparkly piece of cord, and I wasn't entirely sure that the needle would catch it, so I tied a little knot in the end of it before I inserted it and sewed it in. I think that will maybe help keep it in place. Plus, we'll top stitch it. I'm going to go sew this, and when I do, I'm going to leave an opening between one of these points, I'll pick one, to turn this right side out. I'll be back. Okay, a lot's going on there. Number one, the pattern. If you got my newsletter this morning, you saw that there's a link to the PDF that has the scallop flower and the star shape pattern. The pattern has very minimal instructions. I think a lot of you might not need a lot more instruction than is there. But then this video will also be posted with the pattern. So what I'm showing you as part of today really is like the video class that would go with that printed pattern. What was I going to say? Okay, I was going to say by the time you've looked at all this, you could probably have made one. They're fast to make. The hair elastic, that one that I have really is pretty thick. I would use smaller elastic, and you can also buy round elastic. You can buy all kinds of things to use as the little loop. Fabric-wise, 2 8-inch squares. I was using scrap that I had out over on the table, but 2 8-inch squares per caddy is really plenty, and of the cotton fabric. And notice that I traced onto that lining fabric, and then I sew, and then I'll trim. It's easier to sew if you've got that excess fabric around the outside, and it's really easier to trim it to size after it's sewn. Okay, here we go. This one is ready to sew. I'm going to move my bridge out of the way. This is where I have my cord pinned in place. I want to sew that down first, but I don't think that's exactly where I want to turn it. So I'm going to go back to this scallop. I will leave the top of this scallop unsewn to turn the rest. Now let me see if I can get in here. Right there. I'm going to put in a knot. And then I'm going to sew very slowly. I've got a knee lift that I'm operating with my right knee to gently lift the presser foot so that I can turn it. I'll remove pins as I get to them. I'm going to sew around the scallop, and I will rejoin you once I'm all the way around. I have 2 needle caddies in front of me ready to cut out. I think you're going to be able to see me cutting better on this one because the fabric is less busy. I'm using my not quite 6-inch Kai professional scissors with the serrated edge, one serrated blade, to cut this out. You could use a variety of scissors here. Just make sure that the ones you use are nice and sharp and precise. I definitely like the serrated blades here. I'm cutting this out by eye, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. On my star, remember, I have that elastic hair tie. I'm going to cut it as I cut, and it offers a little bit of resistance, so be careful to point your scissors so that if you cut through it too quickly, it won't cut into your shape. Let me show you what it looks like on the scalloped flower. It's a little slower because you want to take your time as you go around these edges to keep your seam allowance uniform. And when you get to that inner point, try not to cut either too far in, too close, or leave it too far out. I'll pick back up when it's time to clip. Okay, so you get them all cut out and then you clip. Let me show you clipping because yeah, I did a video with that. Before you can turn either shape right side out, you'll need to do some trimming, and I'm going to use my smaller professional scissors. You could use a longer scissor, but I want to maintain control of the scissor. on inner points, you will want to clip to, but not through, the seam line. Center your clips. I can feel right here that as I sewed up to this, my elastic shifted, the presser foot shifted it over. If I cared deeply, I would unsew that and fix it. I do not care that deeply, so we'll see what it looks like. And that's the beauty of this. You guys can each decide how much you care about this. I'm going to clip between those two elastic cords toward the inner point. The other thing here is that to turn these points with less bulk, I'm going to need to cut away the seam allowance at the points, leaving almost no seam allowance at the points. On the scallop, you will want to clip inner points, but you're also going to want to clip that outer curve. Yeah, you know, in garment sewing, you do this kind of clipping on sleeves. When I'm doing hand applique, I never, ever, ever clip an outer curve. But the thing is, that is a different kind of sewing. I am not going to clip the outer curve at the opening because I think it's going to make it too hard to control any points that form. Now right there, I can feel that's my cord. I don't want to cut the cord in half. So I'm clipping the fabric there front and back independently from each other. Okay, I want to talk briefly about why you don't clip outer curves in hand applique. And it's because in hand applique, when you turn the seam allowance to the back and it folds over itself and pleats, it does form a point at the outer edge, but you can use your toothpick or your needle and reach into that pleat and smooth it open, and it will smooth out on the outer curve. If you clip outer curves, the fabric doesn't fold over itself and pleat, but it does often do this. And when you've pieced something together like we have here on this flower, there is already a seam line there that helps it not to form a little hairy point where those two clips have folded over each other. But without a seam line, without that already being sewn, if you clip it and it does this, it's much harder to control the little point that can form at the outer edge. All right, and then the other thing you'll notice I said, there's part of this I just didn't care deeply about. Think about what you're making. There are a lot of places in my sewing where I am going to pay a lot of attention to detail. And then there's a needle case where you can be a little more cavalier and still end up with a very nice product. Okay, on to the next part. Once the trimming and clipping are complete, then you can turn these right side out. So I'm going to reach in with my thumb and get that far edge and pull it through. Once you get it turned inside out, you're going to need to pop the curves out. And I'm using the pointy end of my 4-in-1 tool from Alex Anderson. This is the one that has a seam ripper at one end and the little pressing thing, and then it has a stiletto there, not using the stiletto here. And it's got this soft, not super pointed, pointy end. I could use this pressing tool. This one is from Pearl Pereira. The thing about this one is, though, that it's got such a pointy point that it can pierce the fabric. So I am not going to use it to turn this. I'm going to use my wooden tool with the softer point. And you know what? I can tell you that clipping those curves is a win. The curves are not as smooth on my prototype. The flower that when you fold it up kind of looks like a heart is cute. Let's face it, it's just really cute. But every step of the way with the flower is slower. I made all the videos in 3 different needle cases, and then I had an idea. And so I'm breaking in here with a whole other needle case to share it with you. This is the open edge that I'll turn this needle case through. And the trick to getting a good edge here is going to be to use the template to press the curve into it before I turn it. And I can do that with an iron and the template. If you have a template that melts, that's not a good plan. If I had starch, okay, yeah, starch might be helpful here, but I don't have any starch made up. I have pressed in that curve, and I don't want to undo my pretty curve when I do the other side, so I'm going to carefully place that side down on my pressing surface. And I'm using my giant iron. It would probably be easier if I pulled out my travel iron, but the giant iron is what I have handy. I just want to encourage this into a pretty round. Ow, there's steam there. I'm going to let this cool, turn it, and then I'll be back. Yes, that is a good trick because these round edges match pretty well. They weren't perfect when I ironed them with the paper, but they match pretty well. And I'm going to press them here. Those are going to be pretty. And then I'm going to work my way around the flower, moving the edges into round. So then I will press each petal as I go. And where it's flattened out, if I can't use my fingers to move it into round, and sometimes I can, if I can't, I will use my very fine Tula Pink forceps to reach in and coax parts that are a little too flat, pull them out without hurting the fabric any. That one is all pressed. Now I'm going to turn the star. Let me find my open part. But the part of the star that's nice is that you don't have the curves to fool with. So you've got points, and points are easier to turn right side out. This is a straight line, and it is a lot easier to turn to the inside neatly. Got it laid down on my mat. I'm going to use my fingers to turn that in. I'm not going to worry about those threads. I can cut them off later. But now I want to press. And my points are a little bit soft, and I'm not going to let that bother me. If it did bother me, I might try to use my forceps to pull it out a little more, or I might reach in with the tool to see if I can pop any of them a little farther out. Or I would ignore it because I don't think it's going to be that noticeable when it's all said and done. I like to top stitch the edges at this point. It gives you a nice edge and it closes the opening without you having to pull out needle and thread and hand sew it. That's where we're going next. Okay, you missed it, but Steve was just here. He came home to start dinner. I love that man. He makes sure we eat every night. I am a blessed woman. Okay, so one thing I was going to remember to tell you is that in the space of time, this half hour, you could pretty easily have knocked at least one of these out once you get the templates made. I think I said it before. I mean it. It's really, they're fast to make and they're fun. Okay, I've got a trick with top stitching you may not know. I'll show you. I've switched out the feet on my machine to an open-toed embroidery foot. And what's really nice here is that you can line up the folded edge of the fabric with the inside edge of this side of the presser foot. And I'm going to move my needle over by 2 little beeps. And then I'm going to sew slowly toward the point. Lead the needle down and turn. I'm going to be really honest. The star shape is a lot easier to sew. The thing about sewing the scallop is I'm using my knee lift every little bit to lift the presser foot enough so that I can shift the fabric into position to sew the curve. The smoother your top stitch is in relationship to the curvier it will look. So you get the idea. I will come back to you once I have the top stitching finished. Okay, you'll notice I did not change thread colors. I could have, maybe, but white is what's in the machine and white works, so I didn't. But you, of course, have options. You can do that. You can do hand sewing along the outside. You could embroider those outer edges. There are so many options to make these way more exciting than I did. Personally, I'm letting the fabric do the talking, but it would be fun to add embroidery or applique or who knows what to these. And it wouldn't be that hard to plan out whether you did some of the sewing after the top stitching before you add the felt or before you even sew them together. There's a lot of options. Okay, so the trick with the top stitching is when you're using that open toe embroidery foot, moving the needle over and using the side of the foot as a guide is something I didn't know from the get-go with the open-toed embroidery foot. It's a really nice trick to help you keep those stitches in position rather than leaving your needle centered and just trying to guide it that way. Okay, then the felt part, because the felt part is important. That's where the needles go. The part of the needle caddy where you put the needles is made from felt. You could use felted wool. You might be able to come up with some other thing, but I like the bamboo felt. You can find it on my website. I don't know for sure that there's a right side or a wrong side, but I kind of like the looks of this side better. So I'm going to place the felt template on here. And if I was doing a scalloped flower, I would do the same. The felt is on my sandboard. I'm tracing around it again with the graphite pencil. While the felt is flat on your sandboard and you have your pencil in hand, go ahead and use the pencil to draw lightly 4 lines connecting the inner points across the center of either the star or the flower. You will be sewing on these lines. The thread that you sew with will do something to cover those lines, but I would be careful not to make them too strong. Once you have this traced, cut it out. To keep the inner points tidy, cut toward the center from the outside to the inner point. I do the same thing when I'm cutting out a scallop. I'll cut from the top of a scallop to the inner point, and then I'll come from the top of the scallop in the other direction to the inner point. And this is how you prepare the felt part of the needle caddy. The next thing you'll want to do after finishing your top stitching is decide which is the outside and which is the inside, because at this point it could really be either one. But once you do, take the prepared felt and place it with the lines up on the lining side of your needle caddy. Center it, and what you can do is just eyeball inner point to inner point across until you get everything lined up, and then place a pin either at the outer points or at the outer curves, and then sew across from one side to the other using a straight stitch. Take a moment and double check to be sure that you have moved your needle back to center before you start. The bamboo felt grabs the fabric below and it stays put, so I'm not using a walking foot to sew across this. Okay, at either end of those seam lines you can either back stitch or add a little knot from your machine, or both, right? Okay, I'm running a little long, but we're nearly there. So you get your felt sewn in and then you have to press it, plus there's a little more. So I'm going to show you that part. Once everything is sewn, you'll need to press. Place the top of the needle caddy on your mat. Fold diagonally in one direction and press, I used the steam, press that seam, open it up, fold the other way and press that seam. Then open it up and fold it wrong side out and press here and here. Because the way it folds up is that the side comes in, the side comes in, it goes down, and if you've got those creases, it'll fold right up. To close the caddies, you'll need to add a button, and where you place the button is right about there. To use the single cord, it wraps around the button, and if you started with a cord that was very long, as I did, what you can do is pull it down, trim it about just a little bit beyond this point, and then I like to tie a knot in it because it's easier to hold on to. So there's that. The silk ribbon works the same way. If you used loop closures, you may or may not want to use a button that has a shaft. I did. What that means is when it's open, it won't lay as flat, but I don't think that matters so much. Besides, that's just super cute. With the elastic, there's a little bit of stretch, and if I was doing this again with hair elastic, I would buy the elastic that's not quite this thick, but it is easy to hold on to. If you use something that isn't stretchy, as I did here with this cotton twine, you have to be more careful with your button placement. But I liked the twine and I liked the little heart. One last little trick that I want to share with you is this. When you open up both of these needle caddies, you'll definitely have places to put your needles, but behind the felt, there's also space to put a few other things. I will put my wooden toothpicks, just a few. I will probably slide in a flat needle threader, and I use the adhesive leather thimble pads often enough that I'll cut a strip off and slide it behind one of these. But the other thing you can slide in here are pieces of cardstock cut to shape on which you can write what kind of needles, you can leave yourself little messages, and you can cut as many of those as you like to keep in the needle caddy. The easiest place to get those is to print the pattern again onto cardstock, cut the small shape, the felt size shape out, and then cut it apart like this, where you cut across from inner point to inner point. And that will give you 8 of those little pieces of paper to fit inside your needle caddy. And when you fold it up, even with notions inside there, by and large, they stay put. Okay. You know, the whole thing is really cute, I think. I love these things. But the little pieces of paper make me very happy because I know needles and I still have trouble remembering exactly which one is exactly which one. And being able to leave myself notes, oh yeah, that's a win. Plus, the other thing is that having paper behind the felt, when you put your needle in, it will only catch the felt, right? It only catches the felt. So you're not going to by accident be catching too much of the outside. Now, why would that matter? It might only matter, depending on the needles, if you catch too much and pressure is exerted, I wouldn't want to bend any needles. So this helps to keep the needles flatter, keeps the caddy flat. You'll notice I didn't use interfacing anywhere. You could, but I didn't think it was necessary myself. What else was I thinking? I did wonder if making the whole outside part out of felted wool might work. I don't know. I think it might be too thick when you fold it, but it's a thing you could try. So that's fun, right? I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions you'd like me to address on timeout, let me know. There's my email address, becky.piecocake@gmail.com. Let me think what else. Let me click this next thing. There we go. Oh, okay. So yes, I went a little over, but this was fun. I hope you enjoy making these, and you know, on May 1st, think of me, especially if you get to go give somebody a nice present to celebrate spring and the coming end of you know, the pandemic. Oh, happy day. All right. Thank you, guys. I look forward to spending time with you again next week. And until then, may you have many happy stitches. There. Oops, I got to click it again.